All right, guys, let's get going again here. Okay, so one of the things, and if I already talked about this in a previous episode, you'll forgive me. I've officially reached the point in this podcast where I don't always remember if I've said something. So forgive me, but here it is again, if so. Um, One of the things that I think about a lot is, as I've said throughout, is kind of what constitutes acupuncture versus herbs, right? So, the basic history of it is they, when the communists took over China, they were Western materialists, but they realized that they didn't have enough resources to set up a full Western medical system, so they had to work with what they had to provide some level of healthcare to the people in their country. So one of the things that they did, of course, is they systematized essentially, Chinese medicine, right? And so they took the existing TCM herbal system, which is a very simple yet elegant, reasonably easy to teach, easy to learn system. You can get a lot done in a short period of time with some basic formulas and some basic the concepts. The theory itself is relatively easy to grasp, and so that's TCM is herbs. That's how herbs has been done. I mean, there's other herbal systems like Shanghanlun. There's many different ways to do herbs in China, but by far the most well-known and popular historically has been what we call TCM, right? This isn't a new invention. This is old, going way back in Chinese medicine, the concepts you learn, right? This isn't something they made up. But it has to be remembered that TCM is herbal theory. That's how herbs are done, can be done. But the innovation, in a sense, that the communists made was then taking acupuncture and applying TCM herbal theory to acupuncture, right? So that, when you have TCM, you get a diagnosis, you make a treatment plan, and then you administer herbs, right? And then each herb has a list of functions, organ entries, temperatures, all the different things we're used to. So each herb is considered on its own to have a specific function, and then secondary functions, all these things. Acupuncture historically sort of works like that, but it branches out, it breaks out from that particular mold quite quickly, because it's based on palpation. So even points that theoretically don't seem correct, like, why would I use a water point in this situation? And yet, if the palpation tells you that the point should be used, darn it, you use it, even if it goes against what your theory is about why that point should or shouldn't be used in this situation. And most often, when you follow what you find with your fingers, it trumps what you think based on diagnosis, right? So this is kind of, I don't mean to use a pejorative term, but like real acupuncture rather than sort of herbalized acupuncture, where acupuncture points were basically summed up as herbs. So each individual point was given a list of functions, things that it does to suit the TCM diagnosis. Right? So now they create this rather elegant system of dovetailing the herbs and the acupuncture together. But as a general rule, this wasn't historically done. While herbs were more homogeneous in a sense in terms of theory, though, as I said, there were different types of herbalism, acupuncture was wildly heterogeneous. I mean, there are a million kinds of acupuncture, and it's very forgiving that way. One acupuncturist might say that, oh, water points do this, and then another acupuncturist will say water points do the exact opposite thing, and they're both right within the context of their own systems. If you adhere faithfully to the system as it's taught, sort of in a family tradition, then there are internal consistencies within that acupuncture system that make it so that external inconsistencies between two systems are not an issue, as a general rule. This is not the case with herbs. Herbs are not, in a sense, forgiving in this way. You can't There's historically been arguments about the subtleties of different herbs, but by and large, what it does, this is more or less agreed upon. The slight differences in temperature, and is this one emoliating? How emoliating is this one? And these kinds of questions get argued, but you know what it does in a more general way, what category does it belong to? These things are less arguable. But acupuncture points, it's wildly variant. Just one valley over. And acupuncture, the human body, in that way, acupuncture is very forgiving that way. Acupuncture theory, it doesn't operate by TCM rules. They can be related, but are usually quite different. So I'm in my own process of education, learning these rules, and improving my acupuncture that I do. And but one thing that I think about is helping students who studied herbalism at school and herbalized acupuncture at school, which we all did, helping students and practitioners to sort of begin to figure out how to break out of that mold. Right. So here in this case, I wanted to introduce something that sort of represents, in a general way, the way that an acupuncturist might think, as opposed to an herbalist to some degree. Right. So what we're talking about here is insomnia, sleep issues. Right. So let's take a very general look at the body and sort of try to understand how sleep works, right? This is something, in a way, that it's not that you can't do it when you're strictly thinking in terms of herbs. It just isn't really done, this kind of generalization. What do I mean? Okay, so we would say that, and most people have heard this in school, we say that when you're awake, the yang is in the upper half of the body and the yin is in the lower half. And then when you go to sleep, they switch. The yin goes to the upper half of the body, and and everyone, more or less everyone, has heard this in school. And then that's usually as far as they go to explain it. So then the beauty of acupuncture is it can kind of step in and say, oh, well, we can do you one better and kind of explain the mechanics of this generalization. So, for example, we would say, okay, so there's this exchange of yin and yang, meaning that yin, the relative yin of sleep at night, this yin goes up to the upper body into the head, the brain and the heart where the shen is sort of localized. Then the yin goes up there and creates a yin circumstance and the brain can kind of relax. Okay, so then the question becomes, okay, well, how does this occur? Where does this occur? Well, in acupuncture theory, one way to think about this is through the lens of the 8 extras. So in this particular case, we're talking about the yin and yang chao mai. So this is called the motility vessel. This sort of up and down movement is what is indicated here by this particular translation, motility. It very specifically points to movement. And what we're talking about here is, in a sense, the very general way in which yin and yang move upwards and downwards in the body. Okay, so in the case of sleep, then, the yin chao mai moves yin up into the upper body and then pulls it back down into the lower body. And the yang chao mai pushes yang into the upper body, into the head and the heart at the appropriate times, during the day mostly, and then pulls that yang out. And this switch that we talk about, where the yin and the yang switch to the upper and lower body, this happens via the yin and yang chao mai. Okay, kidney 6, UB62, right? What is one of the crossing points of the yin and yang chao mai? Of course, UB1, right? So what you do is you close your eyes and you connect the yin and yang chao mai. You can be sleepy, but you can't fall asleep until you close your eyes, right? I mean, some people can sleep with their eyes half open. That's yang deficiency, specifically spleen yang deficiency, right? They don't have enough yang to sort of keep the eyes shut. And then people with too much yang, like liver qi stagnation types, they can often kind of clench their eyes, their eyelids and stuff when they're dreaming intense and stuff. Lots of musculature and so. But this switch occurs at UB1. So when you look at the indications for UB1, when you look at what UB1 does, it's often used to treat insomnia. Now, we would say, okay, well, some connection there. But now this is the connection. UB1 connects the yin and yang chama. It helps them to communicate with each other to improve the efficiency with which yin and yang are moving up and down in the body. So then you use UB1, you go and then you use kidney 6, UB62. That further regulates this communication, further enhances the efficiency of that communication, further enhances the switching up and down yin and yang. To put a finer point on it, where else might I use this? For example, like hyperactive kids. This would be a very standard treatment for hyperactive kids where they have too much yang in their heads. Even during the day, they may need some more yin quality inside their head, inside their brain, right? Because we're claiming, oh, these kids are hyperactive and they're running around and da-da-da. Well, too much yang maybe, assuming it's pathological, too much yang. So then we use UB62 kidney 6 just to signal to the body, hey, this is what we're trying to do here. My teacher, my mentor, he said that the 8 extras are these very general instructions to the body. And he did not adhere to any notion that using the 8 extras would tap into your jing or anything like that. He actually thought that the 8 extras were a very deep but very general type of treatment. You're just giving the body sort of a generalized instruction on what we want to do. Then you can go into the regular meridians and use those to give more specific instructions. So you might use the chongmai just to be like, hey, look, we're just treating blood today. That's the main focus of what we want to do. I'm not saying anything specific. When I use the chongmai, I'm not saying anything specific about what we're doing with the blood. I'm just priming the body saying, look, today's about blood, right? So then menstrual cycles. But there could be any number of blood type, issues, blood deficiency, blood stagnation, all different kinds of things are possible here. So in this way, then the 8 extras kind of become sort of what you could call like a root treatment. You sort of setting the tone for the treatment by using the 8 extras. Now, in this case, when people have too much or not enough yin or yang in their head, then we can use the yin and yang chamai. A good example of this is we often say, oh, kidney 6 is the point that tonifies the kidney and supplements the kidney yin. But my teacher had the notion that if the patient doesn't have any kidney yin, then kidney 6 won't work because there's no yin to push where you want it to go. So we're saying, look, kidney 6 supplements the kidney yin. Well, his notion was that it actually doesn't supplement the kidney yin. It just pushes it where you want it to go, which is to the upper body, right? So in this case, maybe an elderly patient has insomnia. So then I want to regulate that yin. I want to push more yin to the upper body to improve sleep. But if they don't have any yin, it's not going to do the thing. In my training, kidney 10 is the point that could increase kidney yin in the body, push fluids. It's a water point, so it pushes fluids to the organ, in this case, the kidneys. So you could certainly use kidney 10 and kidney 6 together, sort of doubling up on this, right? So the yin and yang chao mai. I'm not using UB1 in kids. I fudge and use UB2. And if you're real nervous about UB1, you can always use UB2. It's not as strong, but if you're worried about eyeballs and arteries and stuff, then UB2 could be used. So this then represents the mechanism by which sleep occurs. You see? And it provides a treatment strategy for insomnia. So patient comes in and says, doc, I got insomnia. Okay. I already know how I'm starting. Doesn't matter. I already know what I'm doing, how I'm going to start this thing. So another way to look at this is through the yin and yang wei mai. So the yin and yang wei mai, according to my sort of teacher's training, was rather than the upward and downward movement of yin and yang, it's the inward and outward movement of yin and yang. You're sort of regulating the interiorized heat and interiorized yin. So for example, pericardium 6, we would say in this context, pushes yin towards the heart, towards the interior. Right? And then Sanjiao 5 draws heat out to some degree, when he's especially useful in these sort of interiorized heat conditions. Regulates the heat on the exterior, regulates heat in the interior, right? Something like this. So yin and yang wei mai then are kind of secondary channels. You want to push yin towards the heart, pericardium 6. Okay. More ways that acupuncturist thinks about insomnia. What else is there? How about the yang ming? The yang ming consists of the stomach and the large intestines. Both of those organs only ever want to go in a downward direction, right? So we sort of think of the yang ming, this digestive thing, as a tube, right? It starts in the mouth and ends in the anus, and it's just visualizes just a long tube, a long empty tube. Things go through. You want it to be empty when it's empty. You want it to be full when it's full. But it just only goes in a downward direction. Anytime the stomach goes up, this is pathological, right? So it's sort of like the yang ming becomes sort of a descending force in the body, right? So that's where you get points like Li11. We say, oh, it's like the firefighter point, it's the fire hose point. It just clears all heat in the body in any case, no matter what. Well, what is this magical point? Well, by way of explanation then, because it's in the elbow, it sort of activates the organ and opens the organ and increases the efficiency with which it goes in a downward motion, in a downward direction. You're sort of improving the yang ming's ability to go down. Well, why does this clear heat? Because heat goes up. So what you're doing is you're giving the body some kind of generalized instruction saying, hey, just in general, go down. Everybody just go down, because you could use it to treat insomnia. But is there insomnia from a diagnostic perspective necessarily from the yang ming? Not necessarily, right? You get, people call it pizza dreams. You eat too much pizza late at night, and then what do you get? You get strong dreaming at night because the heat in the stomach while you're sleeping creeps up into the heart and creates more dreaming. Now, this would be certainly a place to use a stomach point to clear heat, a large intestine point to clear heat. But you don't have to have the diagnosis of yang ming involvement in their insomnia to be able to use the yang ming points to just create the generalized instructions for the body. Look, everyone who's going up, just go down. And in this case, what we're talking about is heat. You're just encouraging the descending force in the body. Okay? So this is kind of how this works. Of course, if there is something going on in the yang ming, then we get even more specific. But like, for example, you wouldn't use like Da Huang just willy-nilly. There's a very specific set of circumstances in which Da Huang is absolutely brilliant at clearing certain things. But if those particular circumstances aren't present, then Da Huang is just the last thing you'd want to give to somebody with insomnia or anybody ever, right? So herbs are not sort of forgiving in the same way that acupuncture is. You sort of use the wrong point in acupuncture. I sort of think the body kind of just ignores that. It's like, you dummy, you did the wrong point, or you needled it in the wrong direction, and you were supposed to sedate it, you supplement it, whatever. Your body just sort of ignores it. Now, if you get it right, of course, it's better. But if you get it wrong, it still kind of helps, right? So this is where the skill of acupuncture comes in, is getting more things right. You picked the right point. Well, that's good. You got the right location. Oh, that's good. You did the right needle technique. You put the needle in the right direction. You used silver needles instead of gold needles. You whatever it is, all the little rules that rule our planet, the more rules that you can align yourself with, the healthier you'll be and the stronger your acupuncture treatment will be. The world is made of rules. right? Reality is made of mantra. It's made of language. It's made of rules that are the universe is alive in the sense that it's telling you how things work. So the more that you follow the way that the universe is set up, the more you are in line with these things. It's just a bunch of rules, right? So Chinese medicine is brilliant at elucidating these rules for you. Don't overeat, don't eat too much, and da da da, ba ba ba. When you go to the bathroom, don't push, and all these little things. You can ignore some of them. You can't follow all of them, right? I I can't always follow what the planets are doing and be aligned with the stars and everything that I do. Some people, that's what they're interested in. So those are the rules that they align themselves with. I'm interested in something else. So I align myself with a different set of rules. Everybody just has the rules that they want to follow in the world. But this is the idea, right? So acupuncture, it's the same. There's a whole bunch of rules. And acupuncture works pretty well if you don't know them. You just sort of don't know much. Patients get better. But the more rules you understand and can follow, the better and better and better your acupuncture gets by degrees, right? Okay, so this here then is another way, the Yang Ming is another way that an acupuncturist thinks about the body. This is, in a sense, unless there's a very specific reason to use a downward draining Yang Ming type herb, you would never think to use it. It just wouldn't, it would be contraindicated, right? Even if theoretically the concept is correct. Well, I want to clear heat, but I want to create a downward movement to get rid of the insomnia. But if the specific signs and symptoms associated with, for example, Da Huang aren't there, then this is a disaster. Li11, no problem. You're just giving the body some kind of generalized thing. Okay, moving on. Another way to think about this is in terms of, for example, the neck. Remember the neck? I remember Bob Flaws would call the neck like sort of the bottleneck of all the yang in the body. So all the yang that's being produced in the heart and by the body and all that qi has to go up into the neck where all the channels kind of compress and get really close to each other and then go up into the head. And so that neck compression, tight musculature, all that stuff. This is, so many of us carry our stress in this area. This kind of neck compression can affect how yin and yang move in and out of the head. So then in that case, just clearing up some points, just the movement of yang, if the neck is somehow stuck, is somehow stagnant, then the yang can get stuck in the head. You get headaches. If it's stuck, the yang can get stuck in the head and then they're overthinking while they're trying to fall asleep. So the neck might not be the cure by itself. It's just another thing you can do to help work with this. So in this case, you might go and palpate the neck. Are the scalenes really tight? Is the musculature in the neck really tight? I often think of the window of the sky points, right? A lot of points around the neck, not all of them, but we think, oh, window of the sky is some kind of highfalutin thing. But, to some degree, it just strikes me as orthopedics. It's just the way an acupuncturist thinks. Well, if the neck is tight, how can the yang go down? So let's encourage the yang to go down by opening the neck, making those thoroughfares wide open, making it stronger, more efficient, right? So the neck. You get points like anmian. So you could do cupping, gua sha, asher points, these kinds of things. I mean, it's definitely happened to me where I'm doing all kinds of fancy acupuncture and I'm not getting rid of someone's headache. I just do some palpation and needling with no theory, more like a massage, really. And yet then suddenly clears up, all this fancy stuff, and I just forgot basic acupuncture theory. Open the neck. Let the yang go through, right? Okay. What is the aspect of the human body that is related to sleep? The Shen, right? So use points with Shen in the name, right? Ear points like Shenmen and, Heart 7 and these kinds of points that have some kind of Shen-related aspect. Like stomach 40, we know that it calms the Shen. Again, this is a bit of a herbalized acupuncture point of view on it, but, It comes from more classical acupuncture, right? So stomach 40, we know it does calm the Shen to some degree. And it's a Yang Ming point. Stomach 40 is great, right? For insomnia. I love it for insomnia. Not because it clears phlegm, but because in this case, I'm using it for that secondary function of calming the Shen, and it's a Yang Ming point. All Yang Ming points open the Yang Ming to some degree. Strengthen, make more efficient the function of the Yang Ming, right? So stomach 40 seems like an ideal point here. What else do we have? You can, I guess that's basically it. That's all I'm really thinking about. But what this is about is the notion that basically acupuncturists think differently. This is all stuff, that you sort of don't have the luxury to think about in the same way in herbs and when you're doing just strictly herbs, right? So here now, what's funny about all of this is the patient has come in and they said, "Doc, I got insomnia and I've got yin and yang cha mai, yin and yang wei mai, yang ming points, neck points. Oh, another one, abdominal points, abdomen. Where does the qi get stuck on the yin side of the body, on the front of the body? In the abdomen. Where does the qi get stuck on the yang side of the body? In the upper part, in the neck and shoulders. So I already said open the neck, add the shoulders to that. On the front of the body, open the abdomen. If you look at the indications for stomach 25, there's a whole bunch of mental, emotional stuff in there. Insomnia, mental, emotional. Why? Because you're opening the Yang Ming and encouraging that downward movement of Yang. That's going to clear up a lot of stuff. Well, it's going to help, right? So stomach 25, Ashur points, liver 13, points that open the abdomen, that have a qi active role in opening the abdomen and making sure that the qi is moving through there, in and out of there, right? It's a place where the qi can get stuck. The Yang Ming goes right through there. If the Yang Ming is stuck, that Yang is going to be stuck, even in the abdomen, right? So I've given you basically more treatment than you can shake a stick at, two-sided treatment with, all kinds of fancy things, and you still don't know what's going on. The patient just has insomnia. You haven't made any diagnosis, and yet you have a whole bunch of things that you can do to treat that. Then the last thing is to really make that differentiation according to whatever system you're doing, whether you're using sort of TCM Zangfu style, whether you're using a more classical acupuncture style from Korea, Japan, Chinese mainland, whatever, from Taiwan. However that system makes its diagnosis, in a sense, the diagnosis is the last thing you're thinking of, in some sense. Because if all of those body systems that relate to sleep, if those body systems aren't working, you can do all the fancy acupuncture you want, and it may work, but you're pushing the canoe upstream. If you get all the body systems working with you, then your job becomes a lot easier. Then you get that fancy diagnosis and you do those points that, well, now it works, right? So this in general is the way that this is just an example of the way that an acupuncturist thinks, right? And it really opens up your eyes. It opened my eyes up to the notion of what's possible in terms of the way that we think in the clinic, in terms of the way we work. It provides a lot of fluidity to the way that we work, because I don't need to overthink what the diagnosis is. With herbs, you must have a diagnosis or you cannot treat, right? But in acupuncture, this is less the case if you understand the basics of how the body works. Then there's a lot you can do before you've even thought about what's going on with them. Then you get into some fancy stuff and everything's working better. Okay, guys, I suppose there is a lot more to say in terms of pattern differentiation around sleep and insomnia, but for now, maybe we'll leave that to another time. Okay, you guys, I love you all. I'm always glad to hear from you. I've had a number of you reach out with some questions and requests. You guys can always find me at my website, davidallenlac.com. I'm just treating kids. That's all I do. I sadly, not so sadly, but I stopped treating my adult patients. I referred them on to some friends of mine, local colleagues, and I really just decided to focus on my pediatrics. There was so much to learn there, and I do miss doing adult acupuncture actually. So it's been a couple of years now. I'm already wanting to have some adults back in, but it's been a lot of fun. So if you guys have kids, if you know anybody with kids, I'm here. I'm in the San Diego area, but I also do a lot of telehealth. So in that case, what I'm doing is I'm mailing out herbs. So I chat with the family for about an hour, and then we get the diagnosis down, explain what's going on to them, and then I just mail herbs, and then I keep up with them with follow-ups and stuff. So if you guys know kids, or you have kids, or you know people with kids, or whatever, you know, find a local pediatric acupuncturist in your area. If you can't find one in your area, send them my way. I will happy to take care of them. All right, guys, take it easy.